Hashtag a battle-worn female trooper stepped inside. What followed made the SEALs reconsider everything. The rain hammered against the windows of the secure briefing room at Naval Base Coronado like bullets against armor plating. Inside, 12 of the Navy's most elite operators sat around a polished oak table, their faces bearing the weathered marks of countless missions in the world's most dangerous corners. These were SEALs from Team 6, men who had earned their place through blood, sweat, and an unwavering commitment to excellence that few could comprehend. Commander Jake Razor Morrison sat at the head of the table, his steel-gray eyes scanning the classified documents spread before him. At 38, he had led more high-value target operations than most men twice his age. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw served as a permanent reminder of a Taliban ambush in Helmand province that had claimed 3 good men. Today's briefing was different, though. The tension in the room was palpable, not from the mission parameters, but from what command had just informed them. "Gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had stared death in the face and lived to tell about it, "we're getting an addition to the team for Operation Nightfall." Chief Petty Officer Mike "Tank" Rodriguez shifted in his seat, his massive frame making the reinforced chair creak in protest. Tank had earned his nickname not just from his imposing 6'4", 260-pound frame, but from his ability to break through enemy positions like an unstoppable force of nature. "Sir, with all due respect, we've been training for this mission for 3 months. We know each other's moves better than our own wives know our breakfast preferences." Adding someone new at this stage. Morrison held up a hand, silencing the room. "I understand your concerns, Chief. Believe me, I raised them myself with Admiral Stevens. But this comes from the top. Pentagon level. The addition brings specialized skills we apparently need." Petty Officer First Class Danny Ghost Chen leaned forward, his dark eyes narrowing. Ghost had earned his moniker through an almost supernatural ability to move unseen and unheard through hostile territory. In Afghanistan, he once spent 72 hours behind enemy lines gathering intelligence while Taliban fighters literally stepped over his hidden position. "What kind of specialized skills, Commander?" "We've got explosives covered with Boom Boom, medical with Doc, communications with radio, and reconnaissance with Hawk." "What are we missing?" "Long-range precision elimination," Morrison replied, using the military euphemism for sniping. "Apparently, this operator holds the longest confirmed kill shot in military history. 2,800 meters. In a sandstorm. Moving target." The room fell silent except for the rhythmic drumming of rain against reinforced glass. Even these battle-hardened warriors understood the significance of such a shot. Most snipers considered anything beyond 1,000 meters to be pushing the absolute limits of human capability and equipment. Nearly 3,000 meters in adverse conditions was the stuff of legend. Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Boom Boom Sullivan whistled low under his breath. Boom Boom had joined the Navy after growing up in South Boston, where his father worked in demolition. His intimate knowledge of explosives had saved the team countless times, and his Boston accent became thicker whenever he was impressed or angry. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. That's not shooting, that's artillery work with a rifle." The operator also has experience in deep reconnaissance, counterterrorism, and has operated successfully in every major conflict zone over the past 8 years, Morrison continued. "Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, and several classified locations I can't discuss." Senior Chief Petty Officer Mark "Doc" Williams looked up from cleaning his medical kit. Doc had been a trauma surgeon in civilian life before the towers fell on September 11. He enlisted the next day, determined to take his healing skills to places where they were desperately needed. His ability to perform complex medical procedures under fire had saved more lives than anyone cared to count. "Commander, that kind of resume usually comes with significant rank. Are we getting a lieutenant?" "Commander?" Morrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Staff Sergeant. Army. Special Forces background, but recently transferred to a Joint Operations Unit." "Army?" The word came from multiple mouths simultaneously, carrying a weight of inter-service rivalry that ran deeper than most civilians could understand. While all branches ultimately served the same flag, The competition between services was fierce, and SEALs took particular pride in their reputation as the military's premier maritime special operations force. Petty Officer First Class Alex Radio Thompson looked up from the communication equipment he was methodically checking. Radio had been a ham radio enthusiast since childhood, and his ability to establish communications in impossible conditions had been crucial to their survival on more than one occasion. "Sir, no disrespect to our Army colleagues, but SEALs operate differently than Green Berets. Our insertion methods, communication protocols, extraction procedures, everything's different." "Which brings us to the elephant in the room," Morrison said, his voice taking on a tone that suggested he was about to deliver news that would be even less welcome. "The staff sergeant will be here in 30 minutes for integration briefing. I want everyone on their best behavior." Petty Officer First Class Steve Hawk Martinez paused in his study of satellite reconnaissance photos. Hawk had grown up on a ranch in Montana, learning to track and hunt from his grandfather, a Crow Nation elder. His natural ability to read terrain and enemy movement patterns had evolved into an almost mystical talent for predicting enemy actions. "Commander, you said the staff sergeant, like there's something else we need to know." Morrison stood and walked to the rain-streaked window, his reflection superimposed over the gray Pacific Ocean beyond. "Staff Sergeant Riley Matthews she is highly decorated and has never failed to complete a mission objective." The silence that followed was deafening. These men had trained alongside female sailors, Marines, and airmen in various capacities, but the direct combat exclusion policies had prevented women from serving in frontline special operations units until very recently. The integration was still new, still evolving, and still controversial among some of the old guard. "She?" Tank's voice carried a note of incredulity that he immediately seemed to regret. "Sorry, Commander, it's just, we've never." "Neither have I, Chief," Morrison replied, turning back to face his men. "But Admiral Stevens made it clear that this comes from levels where questions aren't welcome. Staff Sergeant Matthews volunteered for this assignment and was specifically requested by name." Boom Boom leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Commander, that record shot you mentioned, 2,800 meters in a sandstorm, when did that happen?" Morrison consulted his notes. 16 months ago. Northern Syria. High-value target elimination that prevented a chemical weapons attack on a refugee camp. The target was moving in an armored vehicle. Single shot, center mass through the windshield." Doc whistled softly. "That's not just marksmanship. That's physics, meteorology, and a little bit of divine intervention all rolled into one. The mission brief indicates that Operation Nightfall requires precisely that kind of long-range precision capability," Morrison continued. "Our target will be heavily guarded, in a fortified position, with multiple escape routes. Standard assault tactics carry an unacceptable risk of target elimination before we can extract the intelligence we need." Ghost studied the reconnaissance photos spread across the table. "So we need someone who can take out key personnel from extreme range while the rest of us move into position." "Makes tactical sense." Radio nodded slowly. "But, Commander, integration into the team dynamics, we've been operating together for 2 years. We know each other's breathing patterns. We can communicate with hand signals in complete darkness. Adding anyone new is difficult, but someone from a different service with different protocols will be a challenge," Morrison finished. "I'm aware of that. But we're professionals, and we adapt to mission requirements. That's what separates us from conventional forces." Hawk looked up from the photos. "What's her background, sir?" "Special forces, you said, but what was her specialty before the sniper role?" Morrison flipped through several classified pages. "Started as military police. Deployed to Iraq, showed exceptional aptitude for marksmanship during convoy security operations. Transferred to military intelligence, then to special forces for advanced training. Served with distinction in multiple theaters. Her efficiency reports are impressive." "How impressive?" Tank asked, his professional curiosity overriding his initial skepticism. 47 confirmed long-range eliminations. 0 mission failures. Wounded in action 3 times, returned to duty each time ahead of schedule. Speaks Arabic, Farsi, and Kurdish fluently. Expert in desert and mountain warfare. Boom Boom counted on his fingers. 47 confirmed kills? That's more than most snipers see in an entire career. It gets better, Morrison continued. She holds expert ratings with 14 different weapon systems, is qualified in Halo and HAO insertions, underwater operations, and close-quarters combat. She's also rated as an instructor in urban warfare tactics. The team exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their growing respect for someone they hadn't even met. These were men who understood the dedication required to achieve even one of those qualifications, let alone all of them. Doc leaned forward. Commander, what happened to her previous unit? Why is she being assigned to us rather than staying with her Special Forces team? Morrison's expression grew somber. Her entire A-team was killed in an ambush in Afghanistan 8 months ago. She was providing overwatch from a concealed position 2 kilometers away. She eliminated 17 enemy fighters while trying to support her team's extraction, but... He didn't need to finish the sentence. The room fell silent as each man contemplated the weight of being the sole survivor of a unit. They all knew the guilt, the second-guessing, the endless replaying of events that such survival brought. It was a burden that could break even the strongest individuals. She's been through psychological evaluation? Ghost asked quietly. Multiple evaluations. All cleared for active duty. The recommendation was that she needed to get back into operational status as quickly as possible. Staying in garrison was actually considered counterproductive to her recovery. Tank nodded grimly. Makes sense. Sometimes the only way to deal with loss is to get back in there and honor the fallen by continuing the mission. Which brings us to the practical considerations, Morrison said, moving back to the table. Billeting, equipment, integration protocols. She'll need a bunk, but base housing is. She can have mine, radio interrupted. I'll bunk with Hawk. We've done it before during extended training exercises. Hawk nodded agreement. No problem, Commander. Radio and I work well together anyway. Equipment? Morrison continued. What's her weapon preference? Boom Boom asked. If she's used to arming equipment, she might need time to familiarize herself with our systems. According to her file, she's qualified and experienced with the 11 Malawian Quachas Mod 0, which is our standard designated marksman rifle. But, for long-range work, she prefers a custom-built system based on the Chetak M200. Apparently, she travels with her own rifle. Ghost raised an eyebrow. Her own rifle? That's unusual. Not for a sniper of her caliber, Doc observed. Most precision shooters develop an intimate relationship with their primary weapon. They know every quirk, every minute adjustment needed for different conditions. Using an unfamiliar rifle at extreme range would be like asking a surgeon to operate with someone else's hands. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside caused all conversation to cease. Morrison straightened his uniform and moved toward the door. Remember, gentlemen. Professional courtesy. She's here because someone with stars on their shoulders believes we need her capabilities. Let's see what she brings to the table before we make any judgments. The footsteps stopped outside the door, followed by a sharp knock that spoke of military precision and confidence. Enter, Morrison called out. The door opened, and Staff Sergeant Riley Matthews stepped into the room. The first thing that struck every man present was that she looked exactly like what Central Casting would order if asked for a battle-hardened warrior. Medium height, perhaps 5'7", with a lean but powerful build that suggested functional strength rather than gymnasium muscle. Her sandy brown hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes swept the room with the alert assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating potential threats and tactical situations in seconds. But it was the details that told the real story. The slight favoring of her left leg that suggested an old wound that hadn't quite healed properly. The small scar above her left eyebrow that looked like shrapnel damage. The way her eyes lingered for just a fraction of a second on exit points and defensive positions. the unconscious positioning of her right hand near where her sidearm would normally rest. This was someone who had seen the elephant, as the old military saying went. Someone who had been tested in the crucible of combat and emerged tempered into something harder and more dangerous than most people could imagine. "Staff Sergeant Matthews reporting as ordered, Commander," she said, her voice carrying a slight southern accent and an undertone of confidence that came from knowing she belonged wherever she chose to stand. Morrison returned her salute. "Welcome to Team 6, Staff Sergeant. These are the men you'll be working with." He began introductions around the table, and Riley acknowledged each man with a nod and direct eye contact that suggested she was filing away details about each individual. When he reached Tank, she studied his massive frame for an extra moment. "Chief Rodriguez, you were at the Battle of Ramadi in 2006, she said. It wasn't a question. Tank's eyebrows rose. "How did you?" "You're in the training videos they show Special Forces candidates. Your breach work on the mosque compound. I've probably watched that footage 50 times. Tank's expression shifted from skepticism to something approaching respect. "You know about Ramadi?" "I know you and your team held off 200 insurgents for 6 hours while waiting for extraction. I know you carried a wounded Marine 3 blocks under fire to reach the evacuation zone. And I know the Marine Corps still uses your tactics in their urban warfare training." The room's atmosphere shifted perceptibly. These men were accustomed to their reputations preceding them in certain circles, but having their specific actions recognized by someone from outside their immediate community was both unexpected and gratifying. When Morrison reached Ghost, Riley's expression grew more serious. "Petty Officer Chen, you were at the compound in Abbottabad." Ghost's face remained impassive, but his eyes sharpened. The details of that particular mission were still highly classified. "That's classified information, Staff Sergeant." "Yes, sir, it is. But your role in that operation is why I requested assignment to this team." The silence that followed was electric. The raid that had eliminated Osama bin Laden was legendary within the special operations community, but the specific details of who had participated were among the most closely guarded secrets in the military. Morrison leaned forward. "Staff Sergeant, how exactly do you know about Petty Officer Chen's involvement in classified operations?" Riley reached into her cargo pocket and produced a sealed envelope bearing multiple classification stamps. "Commander, I have authorization to read you into certain aspects of my background that pertain to this assignment." Morrison took the envelope and examined the seals carefully. The classification levels were higher than anything he had seen outside of the Pentagon. "These authorizations come from Joint Special Operations Command. From the director level." "Yes, sir. My previous assignments have involved joint operations with multiple services. I've worked with SEALs, Delta Force, Rangers, and Marine Force Recon on operations that don't officially exist." She looked around the table, meeting each man's eyes in turn. "Gentlemen, I'm not here because someone decided it would be politically correct to integrate a female into your unit. I'm here because I have specific skills that this mission requires, and because I've worked successfully with several of you before, even if you weren't aware of it at the time." Doc leaned forward. "You've worked with us before?" "Operation Neptune Spear. Pakistan. I provided overwatch for the perimeter security team while the primary assault was conducted on the compound. Petty Officer Chan and I communicated through hand signals for 4 hours while we maintained coverage on potential escape routes." Ghost's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested recognition. "The sniper in the hillside position. 2 clicks north of the compound. That was me. You took out 3 fighters who were moving to flank our position. In complete darkness. Without night vision enhancement. I had night vision. But, yes, those were my eliminations." Tank shook his head slowly. "Why weren't we told there was army support on that mission?" "Because it was need to know, and you didn't need to know. Your focus was on the primary objective. My job was to ensure you could complete it without interference." Morrison studied the classification documents more carefully. "Staff Sergeant, these authorizations suggest you've been involved in operations that technically never happened.
Yes, sir. That's an accurate assessment. Radio looked up from his equipment.
The kind of operations where success is measured by how little anyone ever hears about them.
Exactly. Boom Boom leaned back in his chair. So when you say you've never failed to complete a mission objective,
I mean that in 43 official operations and approximately twice that many unofficial actions, the mission parameters have been achieved 100% of the time.
Hawk studied the reconnaissance photos again.
And, you think Operation Nightfall requires your particular skill set?
I know it does. The target location has been surveilled by National Reconnaissance Office assets for 6 weeks.
Every conventional approach has been wargamed by the Pentagon's best tactical analysts. They all result in unacceptable casualties or mission failure.
Morrison frowned. Staff Sergeant, we haven't been briefed on those assessments.
Riley produced another document from her cargo pocket.
Because those assessments were completed after your initial mission planning.
New intelligence has changed the tactical picture significantly. She moved to the table and spread out a series of satellite photographs that were clearly more recent than the ones the team had been studying. These images were taken 72 hours ago. The target has tripled his security detail and moved to a hardened position that makes direct assault virtually impossible. The photographs showed a compound that looked more like a fortress than the relatively modest structure in their original briefing materials. High walls, guard towers, and what appeared to be heavy weapons emplacements were clearly visible.
Ghost whistled softly. That's not the same target profile we've been training for. No, it's not.
Which is why the mission parameters have been modified. The new plan calls for a long-range elimination of specific high-value targets followed by a rapid assault to secure intelligence materials before the remaining security personnel can destroy them.
Tank studied the new photographs carefully. How long range are we talking about?
Riley pointed to a hilltop visible in the distant background of the images.
The optimal firing position is here. Range to target is 2,400 meters.
The shot will need to be taken at night, in potential adverse weather conditions, and will need to eliminate 3 specific individuals in sequence within a 60-second window.
Doc looked up sharply. 3 targets in 60 seconds at nearly 2.5 kilometers? That's not humanly possible. It's not easy, Riley admitted. But it is possible. I've done it before. Morrison studied the tactical situation depicted in the photographs. Staff Sergeant, even if you can make those shots, what's to prevent the remaining security forces from destroying the intelligence materials we're after? The plan calls for the assault team to begin their approach simultaneously with the long-range elimination sequence.
By the time the security forces realize they're under attack, you'll already be breaching the compound.
Radio shook his head. The timing would have to be perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Which is why we'll need to train together intensively for the next 2 weeks. Learn each other's capabilities, timing, and communication styles.
Boom Boom studied the compound layout. What about extraction? Once we secure the intelligence, how do we get out?
Riley smiled for the first time since entering the room, and it was not a pleasant expression.
That's where things get interesting. She produced yet another document and spread it on the table. It showed detailed schematics of what appeared to be an underground tunnel system.
The compound sits on top of a natural cave network that connects to the ocean approximately 3 kilometers away. Special Operations Command has identified an underwater extraction route that would allow you to exit through the cave system to a submarine pickup point.
Ghost leaned forward to study the schematics. Underwater extraction? Through an unknown cave system? In hostile territory?
The cave system has been mapped by unmanned underwater vehicles. The route is challenging but navigable for experienced divers.
Hawk looked up from the images. What about you? How do you extract from the sniper position? I don't.
The silence that followed was absolute. Morrison's voice was carefully controlled when he spoke.
Staff Sergeant, are you saying this is a one-way mission for you? I'm saying that my extraction is a secondary priority. The mission objectives are primary. Tank's massive hands clenched into fists. That's unacceptable. We don't leave people behind. Chief Rodriguez, with respect, you don't leave SEALs behind. I'm not a SEAL.
The tension in the room became palpable. These men had built their entire professional philosophy around the concept that no one gets left behind, regardless of service branch or mission parameters. Doc's voice was quiet but firm.
Staff Sergeant, we don't leave anyone behind. That's not negotiable.
Riley studied their faces carefully, seeing something that surprised her. Gentlemen, I appreciate the sentiment, but this is how these operations work. Someone provides overwatch and cover while the primary team completes the objective.
Sometimes that person has to hold the position to ensure mission success. Not on my watch, Morrison said flatly.
Staff Sergeant, I don't care what your previous experiences have been or what command told you to expect. This team does not abandon team members. If you're with us for this operation, you're coming home with us. Commander, the tactical situation may not allow for. Then, we changed the tactical situation, Ghost interrupted.
We find a way to make it work for everyone. Radio nodded emphatically. We've never left anyone behind in 2 years of operations. We're not starting now. Riley looked around the table at 12 faces that showed absolute determination.
These were men who had earned their reputations by refusing to accept limitations that others considered insurmountable. You're serious, she said finally.
Dead serious, Boom Boom replied. We go in together, we come out together. That's the SEAL way. Even for an Army outsider who you met 20 minutes ago?
You stopped being an outsider the minute you walked through that door, Hawk said simply. Riley was quiet for a long moment, processing something that clearly didn't align with her previous experiences. In my previous units, the mission always came first. Personnel were expendable if necessary. Not here, Morrison said firmly. The mission is important, but it's not worth more than the people who execute it. She looked at each man again, seeing something she had apparently not expected to find.
You really mean that? We really mean that, Tank confirmed.
So if you're going to be part of this team, you need to understand that we're going to find a way to get you out of that sniper position after the mission is complete.
Riley nodded slowly.
Then, we'll need to modify the extraction plan. She reached into her cargo pocket and produced what appeared to be a small electronic device.
This is a prototype GPS beacon with integrated communication capability.
If I activate it from the sniper position, it will provide precise coordinates for helicopter extraction.
Morrison examined the device. This is military hardware? Technically, it doesn't exist.
But, yes, it's been field tested in similar situations. Ghost smiled grimly. The kind of equipment that officially never existed, for missions that officially never happened.
You're getting the picture.
Radio studied the device's specifications.
How do we coordinate helicopter extraction with submarine pickup for the main team?
2 separate extraction assets. The submarine pickup proceeds as planned for the primary team. The helicopter extraction is contingent on the sniper position remaining secure.
Boom Boom frowned.
What if the helicopter can't reach your position due to enemy action?
Then, I execute the backup plan.
Which is?
Morrison asked.
Riley's expression grew serious. I make my way to a secondary extraction point approximately 15 kilometers from the sniper position. It would require evading hostile forces for potentially several days while moving through difficult terrain.
Tank shook his head. Unacceptable. Too many variables outside your control. Chief, sometimes missions require acceptable risks. This isn't an acceptable risk, Doc insisted.
This is asking someone to basically commit suicide with a small chance of survival. Riley's expression hardened slightly.
Dr. Williams, I've been taking these kinds of risks for 8 years. It's what I do.
Not anymore, Morrison said definitively.
We're going to develop a plan that gets everyone out alive.
She studied his face carefully.
Commander, with respect, you don't know me well enough to make that commitment.
Staff Sergeant, you're about to learn something about how SEALs operate that they don't teach in the Army.
Which is?
Morrison stood and moved to a wall display that showed the team's mission history. Every operation was listed with dates, locations, and personnel involved. We've conducted 63 operations in the past 2 years. Every single person who went out on those missions came home. He pointed to specific entries on the list.
Operation Steel Rain. 4-day insertion behind enemy lines in Afghanistan. Every person came home. Operation Glasshouse. Urban combat in Somalia against overwhelming odds. Every person came home. Operation Thunder Road. Deep reconnaissance in Syria with compromised extraction. Every person came home.
Riley studied the mission list, clearly impressed despite herself.
How? Because we plan for contingencies that other units don't consider.
Because we train for scenarios that other teams think are impossible. And because we never, ever accept that someone has to be sacrificed for mission success.
Ghost leaned forward. Staff Sergeant, you said you've watched training videos of our operations. What you probably didn't see is the planning process that goes into those operations. We spend weeks developing contingency plans for contingency plans. We game out every possible scenario, Radio added.
Equipment failure, weather changes, enemy reactions, extraction compromises. We have backup plans for our backup plans.
Hawk nodded. And we train those plans until we can execute them in our sleep. Because when things go wrong in hostile territory, muscle memory and preparation are what keep you alive.
Riley was quiet for several moments, clearly reconsidering her assumptions about how this unit operated.
You really believe you can modify this mission to extract everyone successfully? We don't just believe it, Boom Boom said. We know we can. Because we're going to make it happen. How?
Morrison smiled, and it was the first genuinely warm expression he had shown since the briefing began.
That's what we're going to figure out together over the next 2 weeks.
He moved back to the table and began gathering the classified documents.
Gentlemen, and Staff Sergeant, we have work to do. Real work.
The kind of planning that turns impossible missions into routine operations. Riley looked around the table one more time, seeing something in these men that she had apparently not encountered in her previous assignments.
You really are different from other units I've worked with. How so? Tank asked.
In special forces, in military intelligence, in every joint operation I've been part of, there was always an acceptable loss calculation.
Someone was always expendable if the mission required it.
Doc leaned back in his chair.
Staff Sergeant, can I ask you something personal? Depends on what it is. When your A-team was killed in Afghanistan, were you considered expendable too? Riley's expression grew distant.
The mission was extraction of high-value intelligence from a Taliban compound. My team was tasked with assault and seizure. I was providing overwatch from a concealed position.
What happened? Intelligence was wrong. Instead of 12 to 15 fighters, there were over 40.
My team was pinned down within minutes of beginning the assault.
Ghost leaned forward. How many did you take out trying to support them? 17 confirmed eliminations. But it wasn't enough.
The Taliban had them surrounded and were moving in for close-quarters combat where my support couldn't help without risking friendly fire. The room was silent except for the continuing rain against the windows.
Command's response? Morrison asked quietly. Extract the sniper.
Mission failure acceptable given changed circumstances.
Tank's face darkened. They ordered you to abandon your team? They ordered me to extract to preserve operational security.
My team was considered lost.
But you didn't extract, Radio observed. No.
I stayed in position for 3 more hours, hoping for a miracle.
What finally happened?
Riley's voice became very quiet. Apache gunships arrived and neutralized the remaining Taliban forces.
But, by then, She didn't finish the sentence. Doc's expression was grim. And, Command blamed you for not following extraction orders? Command blamed me for allowing emotion to override tactical judgment.
The after-action report noted that my refusal to extract when ordered could have compromised future operations if I had been captured.
Morrison shook his head. Staff Sergeant, that's not emotion overriding judgment. That's loyalty to your team.
It was a failure to follow orders. It was refusing to abandon people who depended on you, Ghost corrected.
There's a difference.
Riley looked around the table again, clearly struggling with concepts that didn't align with her previous experiences.
In my world, mission success is the only metric that matters.
In our world, Boom Boom said firmly, mission success means everyone comes home alive.
Even if it makes the mission more difficult?
Especially if it makes the mission more difficult, Hawk replied.
Because that's when planning and training matter most. Morrison began spreading the new satellite photographs across the table again.
Staff Sergeant, you're about to get an education in how SEALs approach impossible problems.
How's that?
We're going to take this mission that was designed to sacrifice you for tactical advantage, and we're going to turn it into an operation where everyone accomplishes their objectives and everyone comes home safely.
Riley studied the photographs showing the heavily fortified compound.
Commander, with all due respect, the tactical challenges are significant.
The target location, the timing requirements, the extraction difficulties are exactly the kind of problems we train to solve, Tank interrupted. Staff Sergeant, let me ask you something. In all your operations, how many times have you had backup for your backup plans? What do you mean? I mean, when you're in that sniper position and something goes wrong, how many different ways out have you planned? Riley considered the question.
Usually one primary extraction route and one alternate.
Ghost smiled. We plan 5. 5 extraction routes from a single position? Minimum, radio confirmed.
Sometimes more, depending on the terrain and tactical situation.
Doc leaned forward.
And we plan for equipment failure, weather changes, enemy reinforcement, communication breakdown, and extraction asset compromise.
All simultaneously? Riley asked. All simultaneously, Morrison confirmed. Because in hostile territory, everything that can go wrong usually does go wrong. Boom Boom nodded.
Which is why we train for scenarios where multiple systems fail at the same time.
Because that's when lives depend on having planned for the unthinkable.
Riley was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of such thorough planning.
That must require enormous amounts of preparation time.
It does, Hawk agreed. Which is why we're going to spend the next 2 weeks doing nothing but planning, training, and rehearsing every aspect of this operation. Morrison moved to a whiteboard mounted on the wall and began sketching a rough diagram of the target compound.
Staff Sergeant, you're going to help us understand the long-range precision requirements. We're going to help you understand how SEALs solve extraction problems.
And, at the end of 2 weeks, she asked. At the end of 2 weeks, we're going to have an operation plan that accomplishes every mission objective while bringing every team member home safely. Riley studied the faces around the table, seeing a level of confidence and determination that was both impressive and somewhat intimidating.
You really believe that's possible?
We know it's possible, Tank said firmly.
Because we've never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with enough planning and preparation. And if we encounter something genuinely impossible?
Ghost's smile was sharp. Then, we changed the definition of impossible. Morrison capped his marker and turned back to the table. Gentlemen, and Staff Sergeant, we have 14 days to turn a suicide mission into a routine operation.
I suggest we get started.
As the team began spreading additional maps and technical specifications across the table, Riley found herself experiencing something she hadn't felt since Afghanistan, the possibility that she might be part of a unit that would actually bring her home. It was a feeling she wasn't sure she knew how to handle. # A battle-worn female trooper stepped inside. What followed made the SEALs reconsider everything. The next 14 days transformed both Riley Matthews and the men of SEAL Team 6 in ways none of them had anticipated. What began as reluctant acceptance evolved into something approaching awe as Riley demonstrated capabilities that challenged everything the SEALs thought they knew about the limits of human performance. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Coronado training facility as Riley made her way to the designated sniper range. It was day 3 of integration training, and she had requested additional time to familiarize herself with the coastal conditions that would affect long-range shooting. The Pacific fog created visibility challenges that were different from the desert environments where she had earned her reputation. At the range, she found Ghost already waiting, along with a custom rifle case that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. "You're early," she observed, checking her watch. The scheduled training didn't begin for another hour. Ghost shrugged. "Wanted to see this legendary rifle of yours before the others arrived." Professional curiosity. Riley nodded and began the careful process of unpacking her weapon system. What emerged from the case was a rifle that looked more like a piece of precision engineering than a military weapon. The stock was custom-fitted carbon fiber, the barrel was a work of art in machined steel, and the scope assembly looked like something NASA might use for deep space observation. "Chaytak M200 base platform," she explained, running her hands along the rifle with the familiarity of long partnership. "But virtually everything has been modified or replaced." Ghost examined the weapon with the appreciation of someone who understood fine craftsmanship. "Custom barrel? Match-grade stainless steel, hand-lapped and cryogenically treated. 29-inch length optimized for the .408 Chaytak cartridge." She pointed to various components as she spoke. "Custom trigger assembly, adjustable from 8 ounces to 3 pounds pull weight. Macmillan A5 stock modified for my exact measurements." "And the scope?" "Schmidt and Bender 5-25x56 with custom turrets calibrated for the specific ballistics of my hand-loaded ammunition." Riley mounted the rifle and demonstrated the scope's adjustment mechanisms. "Each click represents exactly 1/4 minute of angle at any magnification setting." Ghost whistled softly. "What's the effective range?" "In ideal conditions, I've made successful shots out to 3,200 meters. But that was pure luck and perfect weather. Realistically, 2,500 meters is the maximum range where I can guarantee first-round hits on human-sized targets. The longest confirmed kill shot in military history was 2,700 meters, Ghost observed. Canadian sniper in Afghanistan." Riley's expression grew slightly embarrassed. "Actually, that record was broken 16 months ago in Syria. New record is 2,800 meters. By who?" "By me." Ghost stared at her for a moment. "You hold the record for the longest confirmed sniper kill in history, and you're embarrassed about it?" "It wasn't skill," Riley said, beginning to load custom ammunition into the rifle's magazine. "It was luck, good intelligence, perfect weather conditions, and divine intervention. The target was moving in a predictable pattern, the wind was perfectly consistent, and I had unlimited time to make calculations and range adjustments." "Still," Ghost said, clearly impressed despite his professional cynicism. 2,800 meters. That's not shooting, that's artillery work with a rifle." Riley finished loading the magazine and settled into a prone firing position behind the rifle. "Want to see how it works?" Ghost consulted the range markers. "How far can you shoot here?" "Range goes out to 1,200 meters. Not much compared to what we'll face on the actual mission, but enough to demonstrate the basics." She adjusted her position behind the scope and began a methodical process that Ghost recognized as the ritual of precision shooting. Breathing control, natural point of aim, sight picture alignment. But there were elements to her technique that he had never seen before. "What's the wind call?" she asked. Ghost pulled out a handheld anemometer and consulted several wind flags positioned at intervals down the range. "Winds variable. 3 to 5 miles per hour from the southwest, gusting to 8. Riley made minute adjustments to her scope and body position. "Range to target?" 800 meters. "Atmospheric pressure?" Ghost checked his instruments. 30.1 inches mercury. "Temperature?" 54 degrees Fahrenheit. "Humidity?"
68%. Riley performed calculations that seemed to involve both mathematical precision and intuitive understanding that came from years of experience.
She made several tiny adjustments to her scope settings, then settled into perfect stillness behind the rifle. The shot, when it came, was a surprise to Ghost despite his expectation. The rifle's report was sharp and powerful, but Riley's body absorbed the recoil with practiced efficiency. Through his spotting scope, Ghost watched the bullet strike the 800-meter target exactly in the center of the bullseye. First round hit, he confirmed.
Dead center.
Riley worked the bolt and chambered another round.
Let's try something more challenging.
She adjusted her aim to a target at the maximum range of the facility.
1,200 meters.
Same wind conditions, but the target is partially obscured by that support post. Ghost studied the target through his spotting scope. The steel silhouette was indeed partially hidden behind a concrete support structure, leaving only a narrow portion of the target visible.
That's maybe a 6-inch window.
Which is approximately the same targeting challenge we'll face on the actual mission. Riley made additional calculations and scope adjustments, then settled into her firing position with the same methodical precision. This time, Ghost could see her taking the wind variance into account, waiting for a lull in the gusting breeze. The second shot struck the visible portion of the target exactly where Riley had aimed, despite the challenging angle and distance.
How do you do that? Ghost asked. That kind of precision at that range, it's not normal.
Riley began the process of cleaning her rifle barrel, a ritual that clearly held almost religious significance for her.
It's not magic, if that's what you're asking. It's mathematics, physics, and practice. But most snipers can't achieve that level of consistency.
Most snipers don't have the luxury of unlimited practice ammunition and access to precision reloading equipment. Riley ran a cleaning patch through the barrel and examined it carefully.
I reload all my own ammunition.
Every cartridge is weighed, measured, and calibrated to exact specifications.
How exact? Powder charges are measured to within 1/10 of a grain. Bullets are sorted by weight variations of less than half a grain. Cases are trimmed to identical lengths and neck turned for uniform wall thickness. Ghost shook his head. That's obsessive.
That's the difference between hitting and missing at extreme range, Riley corrected. At 2,500 meters, a variation of 2 grains in powder charge can mean the difference between a center hit and a complete miss. As she continued the cleaning process, Ghost noticed the practiced efficiency of her movements. Every action was deliberate and necessary, with no wasted motion or unnecessary steps. How long have you been doing this? He asked.
Loading my own ammunition? About 6 years. Precision shooting in general? 8 years. What got you started?
Riley paused in her cleaning routine, and Ghost saw something in her expression that suggested painful memories.
My first deployment to Iraq.
I was military police, assigned to convoy security. We kept losing vehicles to long-range sniper attacks that our designated marksmen couldn't counter.
So you decided to become the counter-sniper?
I decided to learn how to kill people who were killing my friends, Riley said simply.
Everything else developed from that basic motivation. Ghost understood that kind of motivation.
It was the same drive that had led him to become one of the Navy's premier reconnaissance specialists after watching a Marine squad get wiped out by an ambush that proper intelligence could have prevented. The accuracy you demonstrate, he said carefully, that takes more than motivation. That takes natural talent. Riley shrugged.
Maybe.
Or maybe it just takes refusing to accept that missing is an option.
What do you mean?
I mean that when someone is depending on you to make an impossible shot, you find a way to make it possible. You study the physics until you understand exactly how bullets behave in different atmospheric conditions. You practice until your muscle memory is perfect. You prepare until there's no variable you haven't accounted for. She finished cleaning the rifle and began the process of reassembly. And, when the shot matters, when lives depend on it, you don't miss. Because missing isn't acceptable. Ghost watched her work, noting the same attention to detail and precision that characterized her shooting.
Is that what happened in Syria? The 2,800-meter shot? Riley's hands stilled for a moment. Chemical weapons convoy.
Intelligence indicated they were moving VX nerve agent to a refugee camp for a false flag attack that would justify massive retaliation against civilian targets.
How many potential casualties? 12,000 refugees. Plus, however, many civilians would have died in the retaliatory strikes. Ghost felt the weight of that responsibility. And the only way to stop it was a long-range elimination?
Target was the convoy commander. Without him, the remaining personnel didn't have authorization codes to deploy the weapons. But he was traveling in an armored vehicle, moving at high speed, in a sandstorm. Moving target at 2,800 meters in a sandstorm, Ghost repeated. That's not a shot, that's a prayer. It was the only shot available, Riley said simply. So I made it work. She finished reassembling the rifle and began returning it to its case. But, like I said, it was luck as much as skill.
I doubt that, Ghost said. Luck doesn't account for the kind of precision I just watched you demonstrate.
The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their conversation. The rest of the team was arriving for the day's training session, along with several instructors and support personnel. Tank was the first to reach the firing line, carrying what appeared to be enough ammunition to supply a small war. Morning, Staff Sergeant.
Ghost. Ready for some serious long-range work? Ready, Riley confirmed. How do you want to structure the training? Commander Morrison joined them, along with several officers that Riley didn't recognize.
Staff Sergeant, these are specialists from the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. They're here to observe and evaluate the integration process. Riley nodded politely, but Ghost could see her tensing slightly.
Evaluation sessions were often more about finding problems than recognizing capabilities.
What specific areas do you want to evaluate? She asked.
Captain Sarah Chen, the Senior Development Group observer, consulted her notes.
We need to understand how your capabilities integrate with standard SEAL tactics and procedures. Long-range precision shooting is one component, but we also need to assess close-quarters combat, underwater operations, insertion and extraction procedures.
Riley's expression grew cautious. Captain, my specialization is precision marksmanship.
The other skills are secondary.
In SEAL operations, there are no secondary skills, Morrison observed.
Every team member needs to be capable in all operational areas. Which means, Tank added, we need to see what you can do in situations where the fancy rifle isn't available.
Captain Chen nodded. We've set up a series of evaluation scenarios.
Close quarters combat, underwater navigation, urban warfare simulation, and emergency medical procedures. Riley looked around at the assembled group, clearly realizing that this was more than routine training. This is a qualification assessment. It's an integration assessment, Morrison corrected. We need to understand your capabilities across the full spectrum of potential mission requirements. Ghost could see Riley's discomfort with the situation. As a specialist, she was accustomed to being evaluated on her primary skill set, not on areas outside her expertise. But SEAL training philosophy demanded competence across multiple disciplines. Staff Sergeant, Captain Chen said, we'll start with close-quarters combat.
Standard hand-to-hand scenarios.
The group moved to a training facility that looked like a cross between a gymnasium and a medieval torture chamber. Mats, punching bags, and various training apparatus filled the space, along with several instructors who looked like they could bench press small automobiles. Master Chief Petty Officer John Crusher Williams stepped forward to conduct the evaluation.
Crusher had earned his nickname through an unfortunate tendency to accidentally injure sparring partners during training exercises.
He was built like a concrete wall and had the gentle personality of a charging rhinoceros.
Staff Sergeant, Standard Combat Evaluation.
3 scenarios: unarmed opponent, knife-wielding opponent, and multiple attackers. Riley nodded, but Ghost could see her calculating the physical mismatch. At 5'7" and perhaps 140 pounds, she was giving away significant size and strength advantages to most potential opponents. "Who's the sparring partner?" she asked. Crusher smiled, and it was not a reassuring expression.
"That would be me." Ghost winced internally.
Crusher outweighed Riley by at least 100 pounds, had 6 inches of height advantage, and possessed the kind of combat experience that came from growing up in Detroit's most dangerous neighborhoods. "Master Chief," Morrison said carefully, "perhaps we should start with a more proportional opponent." "Sir, if the staff sergeant is going to operate with SEALs, she needs to demonstrate capability against realistic threats," Crusher replied.
"Bad guys don't come in convenient sizes."
Riley was already removing her equipment and preparing for the sparring session.
"Master Chief is correct, Commander. If I can't handle close-quarters combat against a larger opponent, that's a tactical limitation you need to know about."
She stepped onto the training mat with the fluid grace of someone who was comfortable in her own body. Ghost noticed that her stance and positioning suggested formal martial arts training, though he couldn't immediately identify the specific discipline. "Rules?" she asked.
"Standard sparring rules," Crusher replied. "No strikes to head, neck, or groin.
No submission holds that could cause permanent injury.
Match ends when one fighter yields or is rendered unable to continue."
Riley nodded and assumed a fighting stance that looked deceptively casual.
Ghost recognized elements of several different martial arts systems, suggesting she had been cross-trained by multiple instructors.
Crusher moved forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to winning through superior size and strength. His opening attack was a straightforward combination of punches designed to overwhelm Riley's defenses through sheer power. What happened next surprised everyone present, including Ghost. Riley moved with a speed and precision that turned Crusher's attack into a teaching moment about leverage and physics. She redirected his momentum, used his own strength against him, and somehow managed to put the massive Master Chief on the mat without appearing to exert significant effort.
The entire sequence took perhaps 3 seconds.
Crusher bounced back to his feet with a surprised expression.
"Okay, that was unexpected." "Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu," Riley explained.
"With some Krav Maga modifications for military applications."
"How long have you been training?"
6 years of formal instruction.
"But, I've been improvising combat techniques since childhood."
Captain Chen made notes on her evaluation form.
"Impressive. Let's see the knife defense scenario."
Crusher picked up a training knife and assumed an aggressive posture.
"Standard knife attack. I'm going to try to stab you. You're going to try to stop me."
Riley nodded and repositioned herself. This time, Ghost could see her calculating angles and distances with the same precision she applied to long-range shooting. Crusher's attack was fast and aggressive, the kind of knife assault that would overwhelm most opponents through speed and ferocity. Riley's response was a combination of evasion, redirection, and counterattack that resulted in Crusher being disarmed and immobilized before he could complete his initial thrust.
"Krav Maga," she explained again.
"Israeli military close-quarters combat system."
"Where did you learn that?" Morrison asked. "Cross-training with Israeli Defense Forces during joint operations in Syria.
They have very effective techniques for dealing with knife attacks."
Tank whistled appreciatively.
"Staff Sergeant, you're full of surprises."
"Multiple attackers scenario," Captain Chen announced. 3 opponents, various weapons.
3 instructors stepped onto the mat, armed with training weapons that included a knife, a baton, and a simulated pistol.
Riley studied their positioning and equipment with the same analytical approach she applied to target assessment.
"Rules?" she asked. "Survive," Crusher replied simply.
The multiple attacker scenario was designed to be overwhelming.
3 trained fighters with weapons attacking simultaneously from different angles should have been impossible for a single person to handle effectively. Riley's response demonstrated why she had survived 8 years of combat operations in the world's most dangerous environments. She moved with a combination of speed, precision, and tactical awareness that turned the numerical disadvantage into a series of one-on-one encounters. By controlling positioning and using her opponent's movements against each other, she systematically neutralized each attacker without allowing them to coordinate their attacks. When the scenario ended, 3 instructors were on the mat, and Riley was still standing.
The training facility was completely silent. "Jesus," Tank muttered. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Riley helped one of the instructors back to his feet.
When you're the only woman in his Special Forces unit, you learn to handle yourself against larger opponents. That wasn't just handling yourself, Ghost observed. That was dominating a tactical situation that should have been impossible to win.
Captain Chen was making extensive notes.
"Staff Sergeant, your close-quarters combat capabilities significantly exceed our expectations."
"Thank you, Captain." "Let's move to underwater operations," Morrison announced. "The mission profile includes potential underwater extraction."
The group relocated to the base's dive training facility, where an Olympic-sized pool had been configured to simulate various underwater scenarios.
Ghost could see Riley's confidence level shift as they approached water-based training.
"Underwater experience?" he asked.
"Basic scuba certification," Riley replied.
"But most of my diving experience has been in lakes and rivers, not ocean conditions." "Ocean diving is significantly different," Boom Boom observed.
"Currents, visibility, temperature variations. It's a whole different skill set." Chief Petty Officer Lisa Fins Martinez stepped forward to conduct the underwater evaluation.
Fins was one of the Navy's premier dive instructors, and her underwater capabilities were legendary even among SEALs. "Staff Sergeant, we'll start with basic underwater navigation," Fins announced. "Swim to the far end of the pool, locate a specific object, and return.
All underwater, no surface breathing."
Riley nodded and began preparing her diving gear. Ghost noticed that her equipment familiarity was less confident than her weapons handling, suggesting this was indeed an area where her experience was limited. "Pool depth is 12 feet, Fins continued. "Water temperature is 68 degrees. Visibility is deliberately reduced to simulate ocean conditions." Riley submerged and began swimming toward the far end of the pool. Her technique was competent but not exceptional, and Ghost could see that she was working harder than a trained combat swimmer would need to. She located the target object and began the return swim, but Ghost noticed she was struggling with air management and navigation in the reduced visibility conditions. When she surfaced, she was breathing heavily and clearly out of her comfort zone.
"Time?" she asked. "4 minutes, 30 seconds, Fins replied.
"Acceptable, but not optimal for combat operations."
Captain Chen made more notes.
"Staff Sergeant, underwater operations appear to be an area where additional training would be beneficial." Riley nodded, clearly frustrated with her performance.
"I understand that, Captain. Water operations aren't my specialty."
"They'll need to become your specialty if you're going to operate with SEALs," Morrison said, but his tone was supportive rather than critical. Ghost stepped forward.
"Staff Sergeant, how much time do we have before the mission?" 10 days remaining in the training cycle." "That's enough time for crash course underwater training," Tank observed. "We've done it before with other specialists." Fins nodded agreement. "I can design an intensive program that will bring her up to operational standards in 10 days. But it'll be challenging." Riley's expression showed determination that Ghost recognized from their sniper training. "What would that involve?"
6 hours per day in the water, Fins replied. "Navigation, combat swimming, emergency procedures, and equipment familiarization."
"I can do that." "It won't be easy," Fins warned. "We'll be compressing months of training into 10 days." "I understand." Morrison consulted his schedule. "Fins, design the program."
"Staff Sergeant, you'll be training with Chief Martinez every day until the mission."
Captain Chan looked up from her notes. "Let's continue with urban warfare simulation."
The group moved to a training facility that had been configured to resemble a Middle Eastern urban environment. Buildings, alleyways, and various obstacles created a realistic battlefield scenario. "Staff Sergeant," Captain Chen explained, "this exercise simulates the kind of urban combat environment you might encounter during insertion or extraction operations." Riley studied the layout with the same analytical approach she applied to long-range targeting.
"What's the scenario?" You're separated from your team during an urban operation, Morrison explained. You need to navigate through hostile territory to reach a predetermined extraction point. Opposition forces? Multiple enemy fighters with various weapons and equipment. They know the terrain better than you do, and they have numerical superiority. Riley nodded. Time limit? 30 minutes to reach the extraction point. If you're captured or eliminated before then, the scenario is considered a failure. Ghost could see Riley calculating the tactical challenges involved.
Urban warfare required a completely different skill set than long-range precision shooting, and the unfamiliar environment would test her adaptability under pressure.
Equipment, she asked.
Standard assault rifle, sidearm, and basic load of ammunition.
No special equipment or support.
Riley checked the M4 carbine she had been issued and familiarized herself with its operation. Ghost noted that her weapons handling was confident and professional, suggesting she was comfortable with multiple weapon systems. Ready when you are, she announced. The urban warfare simulation began with Riley positioned in a simulated building that was taking simulated enemy fire. She needed to move through the urban environment while avoiding or neutralizing enemy forces, ultimately reaching an extraction point on the opposite side of the training area. Ghost and the other team members observed her progress through a sophisticated monitoring system that tracked her movement and tactical decisions. Riley's approach to urban warfare demonstrated the same methodical planning and execution that characterized her marksmanship. She moved carefully, used cover and concealment effectively, and avoided unnecessary engagement with enemy forces when possible. When combat was unavoidable, she demonstrated accurate shooting and tactical awareness that kept her alive and moving toward her objective. She's good, Tank observed, watching Riley systematically clear a building that contained multiple enemy fighters. Better than good, Ghost replied. She's thinking 3 moves ahead. Radio nodded. Look at how she's using the terrain. She's not just reacting to enemy contact, she's controlling the tactical situation. Riley reached the extraction point with 4 minutes to spare, having successfully navigated the urban environment while neutralizing 12 enemy fighters and avoiding capture. Time, she asked as she reached the designated extraction zone. 26 minutes, Captain Chan replied. Well within the acceptable parameters. Morrison nodded approvingly. Staff Sergeant, your urban warfare capabilities are solid. Thank you, Commander. But I can see areas where I need improvement. Such as? Building clearing techniques. I was too slow in several situations where speed would have been tactically advantageous. And my ammunition management could have been more efficient. Ghost was impressed that she could identify her own weaknesses so clearly. Those are skills that can be improved with training. Which brings us to the final evaluation, Captain Chen announced. Emergency medical procedures. The group moved to a medical training facility where Doc Williams was waiting with various training mannequins and medical equipment. Staff Sergeant, Doc explained, we need to assess your capability to provide emergency medical treatment under combat conditions. Riley nodded. I have standard military medical training, but I'm not a medic. In SEAL operations, everyone needs to be capable of basic trauma medicine, Morrison observed. When you're operating in remote locations without immediate medical support, team members need to be able to treat each other. Doc set up several medical emergency scenarios using training mannequins that could simulate various types of combat injuries. We'll start with gunshot wound treatment. The medical evaluation revealed that Riley's emergency medical skills were adequate but not exceptional. She could perform basic trauma treatment and stabilize wounded personnel, but she lacked the advanced medical knowledge that Doc possessed. Acceptable, Doc concluded after the evaluation. But, like underwater operations, this is an area where additional training would be beneficial. Captain Chan reviewed her extensive notes. Overall assessment? Morrison looked around at his team members, reading their expressions and nonverbal communication. Staff Sergeant Matthews demonstrates exceptional capabilities in precision marksmanship and close-quarters combat. Her urban warfare skills are solid, and her tactical awareness is outstanding.
Areas for improvement? Underwater operations and advanced medical training.
Both can be addressed during the remaining training period. Captain Chen nodded and closed her evaluation folder.
Based on this assessment, I'm recommending approval for operational integration. Riley's expression showed relief and satisfaction. Thank you, Captain.
Don't thank me yet, Morrison said with a slight smile. Now the real training begins.
Tank laughed. Staff Sergeant, what we just did was the easy part. Now we get to teach you how to operate like a SEAL. What does that involve? Ghost's expression was serious.
It means learning to think like part of a team rather than as an individual specialist. It means understanding how your capabilities integrate with everyone else's.
Radio nodded.
And it means training until we can operate together in complete darkness, in hostile territory, under maximum stress, without any communication except hand signals.
Boom Boom grinned.
The fun stuff, in other words. Riley looked around at the faces of the men who were now officially her teammates.
How long do we have? 9 days, Morrison replied.
9 days to turn a collection of individual specialists into a seamlessly integrated operational unit.
Hawk consulted his training schedule.
Which means we need to start right now. As the group began moving toward the next training facility, Ghost fell into step beside Riley. How do you feel about the evaluation? He asked quietly. Riley was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the experience.
Different from what I expected. How so?
In my previous units, evaluations were about finding weaknesses to exploit or reasons to disqualify someone. This felt more like assessment to determine how to integrate strengths.
Ghost nodded. SEALs approach training differently than most units.
We're not looking for reasons why something won't work.
We're figuring out how to make everything work together. Is that why you don't leave people behind?
It's part of it, Ghost replied. When you invest that much time and effort in making everyone capable of supporting everyone else, abandoning a team member becomes unthinkable. Riley was quiet for a long moment.
I've never been part of a unit that operated that way. You are now.
As they approached the next training facility, Riley realized that she was about to undergo the most intensive learning experience of her military career. But, for the first time since Afghanistan, she was beginning to believe that she might be joining a team that would actually bring her home. # a battle-worn female trooper stepped inside. What followed made the SEALs reconsider everything. 9 days later, Staff Sergeant Riley Matthews found herself lying prone on a windswept hillside 2,400 meters from a target that would test everything she had learned about operating as part of a SEAL team. The transformation from individual specialist to integrated team member had been more profound than anyone had anticipated, changing not only how she operated, but how the SEALs themselves understood the possibilities of their own capabilities. The mission was real now.
Operation Nightfall was no longer a training exercise or theoretical planning session.
Intelligence assets had confirmed that the target compound contained 3 high-value individuals whose elimination was critical to preventing a terrorist attack that could claim thousands of innocent lives. Through her scope, Riley could see the heavily fortified compound that looked exactly like the satellite photographs they had studied for 2 weeks. Guard towers, reinforced walls, and heavily armed security personnel exactly as predicted. But she also saw details that no satellite could capture: the subtle patterns of guard movement, the small gaps in coverage that could be exploited, the precise timing that would be required for the mission to succeed. "Overwatch, this is Lead," came Commander Morrison's voice through her earpiece.
Status report.
Riley keyed her radio with a hand signal that Tank had taught her, maintaining noise discipline while providing clear communication.
Lead, Overwatch. Target area under observation. 3 primary targets identified and marked. Security pattern is briefed. Copy, Overwatch. Stand by for final coordination check.
Riley settled more deeply into her concealed position and reviewed the sequence of events that had brought her to this moment. The 9 days of intensive training had challenged every assumption she had about individual capability versus team performance. Chief Martinez had pushed her through the most brutal underwater training she had ever experienced. 6 hours per day in the pool, then, progressively more challenging ocean conditions. By day 4, she could navigate underwater in zero visibility using only compass heading and dead reckoning. By day 7, she could perform emergency procedures while underwater that she hadn't even known existed. Doc Williams had compressed months of advanced medical training into a crash course that left her capable of performing trauma surgery under field conditions. She could now establish access in complete darkness, perform emergency surgical procedures with improvised instruments, and treat multiple casualty scenarios that would overwhelm most trained medics. But, the most significant change had been learning to think as part of a team rather than as an individual operator. Tank had spent hours teaching her the subtle communication methods that allowed SEALs to coordinate complex operations without verbal communication. Hand signals, body language, positioning cues that conveyed detailed tactical information instantaneously. Ghost had shown her how to integrate long-range reconnaissance with close-quarters tactical operations. Instead of thinking about her sniper position as a separate element providing support, she learned to see it as one component of a larger tactical system where every element supported every other element. Radio had taught her communication protocols that allowed her to coordinate with multiple team members simultaneously while maintaining operational security. She could now manage 3 different radio frequencies, coordinate with support assets, and provide real-time intelligence updates without compromising team positions. Boom Boom had expanded her understanding of explosive breaching and demolitions, showing her how precise charges could create tactical advantages that changed the entire dynamic of an operation. She learned to think about terrain modification as another tool available to the team. Hawk had shared techniques for reading terrain and predicting enemy movement patterns that complemented her long-range observation capabilities. She could now identify potential ambush sites, predict likely enemy reactions, and provide early warning that gave the team significant tactical advantages. Most importantly, she had learned to see herself not as an individual specialist providing support to a SEAL team, but as a SEAL team member whose specialty happened to be long-range precision engagement. The difference in mindset was profound and had changed everything about how the mission was planned and executed. All stations, this is Lead, Morrison's voice came through the earpiece again. Final equipment check. Report status. Lead, Ghost. Reconnaissance complete. Target building layout confirmed. 3 primary targets identified in separate locations within the compound. Lead, Tank. Breach charges positioned and armed. Ready for initiation on your command. Lead, Radio. Communications net established. Support assets standing by. Lead, Boom Boom. Secondary charges armed and positioned. Ready for tactical advantage creation. Lead, Document medical kit prepared. Casualty collection point established. Lead, Hawk. Approach route clear. Enemy pattern analysis complete. Riley keyed her radio. Lead, Overwatch. Long-range systems operational. Primary targets marked and ranged. Weather conditions optimal. Ready for engagement sequence. Copy all stations, Morrison replied. Execute in 60 seconds on my mark. Riley made final adjustments to her scope and settled into the perfect shooting position that had become second nature over the past 2 weeks. But, instead of the isolation she had felt during previous operations, she was acutely aware of being one element in a coordinated team effort. Through her scope, she could see Tank and Boom Boom positioned at the compound's main gate, ready to begin their explosive breach the moment she eliminated the primary targets. Ghost was invisible in his Overwatch position, providing early warning and tactical intelligence. Radio was coordinating with helicopter and submarine assets that would provide extraction support. Doc was positioned to provide immediate medical support if anyone was wounded during the assault. Hawk was monitoring the team's approach route and enemy reaction patterns. Everyone was in position. Everyone was ready. Everyone was depending on her to make 3 impossible shots in 60 seconds so they could complete their part of the mission. Mark, Morrison's voice came through the earpiece. Riley centered her crosshairs on the first target, a high-value terrorist leader who was visible through a window on the compound's second floor.
Range, 2,400 meters.
Wind, 3 miles per hour from the southwest.
Temperature, 42 degrees. Atmospheric pressure, standard.
She controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth pressure that had become automatic. The first shot struck exactly where she had aimed. Through her scope, she saw the target eliminated instantaneously. Without changing position, she shifted to the second target, visible in the compound's courtyard. Slightly closer range, but moving in a predictable pattern that Tank had identified during reconnaissance.
The second shot eliminated the second target before security personnel could react to the first elimination.
The third target was the most challenging, partially concealed behind cover, at maximum range, with only a small portion of his body visible through a gap in the compound's defensive barriers. Riley made minute adjustments for the increased range and limited target profile, then squeezed the trigger for the third time in 45 seconds. The third shot struck the target precisely where she had aimed, completing the long-range elimination sequence exactly as planned.
Overwatch, 3 targets eliminated, she reported calmly. Area clear for assault. Copy, Overwatch, Morrison replied. Execute breach.
Through her scope, Riley watched Tank and Boom Boom initiate their explosive breach of the compound's main gate. The charges detonated with precision timing that created a gap large enough for the team to assault through while minimizing structural damage to the buildings containing intelligence materials. The assault phase of the operation unfolded with the mechanical precision of a well-rehearsed ballet. Each team member executed their assigned role perfectly, and the integration training they had completed allowed them to adapt instantly to changing tactical conditions. Riley continued providing overwatch and tactical intelligence as the team moved through the compound. She could see enemy personnel reacting to the assault, and her position gave her a perfect perspective for providing early warning of potential threats. Lead, Overwatch, she reported.
For enemy personnel moving to flank your position from the southwest. Range 300 meters from your location. Copy, Overwatch. Can you eliminate?
Riley shifted her scope to the flanking enemy personnel. At this shorter range, the shots were routine rather than challenging.
For targets eliminated, she reported after a brief engagement sequence.
The assault team continued their movement through the compound, systematically clearing buildings and securing intelligence materials while Riley provided continuous overwatch and support.
Lead, Overwatch.
2 vehicles approaching from the east.
Approximately 20 personnel. Estimated arrival at your location in 3 minutes. Copy, Overwatch. Can you delay their approach?
Riley shifted her scope to the approaching vehicles and calculated engagement angles. She could disable both vehicles with precision shots to their engines, forcing the enemy personnel to approach on foot and buying the assault team additional time. 2 shots disabled both vehicles, and the enemy personnel were forced to continue their approach dismounted, significantly reducing their tactical effectiveness.